Hello and welcome to a new game. There's a very strong tournament going on right now in CCC, and here are the standings after about 100 rounds. There's 5 of them, so every round one of them doesn't play. That's why some of them have more games than others, but this is only temporary. Of course, in the end they will all have the same amount of games. And from this list we already know Stockfish, Leela and Liechtenstein, but in the top of the list there is Terminator. Now, what the heck is Terminator? And why is he playing chess? And what is a Turbofish? Well, Terminator is actually a kind of a Leela using a bigger neural net, which can retain more information during learning, but it is also slower. It makes sense. If it's bigger, then it takes more time to output the moves, so there is a sweet spot for every hardware between chess knowledge and speed of calculation. And chess.com has some pretty good hardware. As we can see, the larger net pays off. And Turbofish is just a stockfish with a very high content value that makes him very ambitious, overly ambitious. He tries to avoid any kind of simplifications that could lead to a draw, but in this very strong field, trying to win everything backfired heavily, as we can see, since he is in the last place. Stockfish, as far as I know, has 0 contempt in this tournament. That makes him apparently a lot stronger. And in this video now I want to show you a nice game played between the two Leelas and nicely won by the leader of the tournament. Terminator started the game with d4, and after knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3 and bishop g7 we have a King's Indian defense on the board. And after e4 and d6 we have f3, the Sämisch variation, which is one of White's most ambitious tries in this opening. White wants to castle queenside and then attack the black king with moves like h4 and h5 and even g4. And by playing f3, White takes away the g4 square from the black pieces, making them have less movement possibilities on the king side. The game continued with castles, bishop e3, and now after knight d7 the book ends with queen d2. And in this position black has a couple of plans. He can either try to engage white in the center with moves like e5 and c5 and try to keep white busy in the center instead of the king side, or the second plan is to play a6, c6 and attack the c4 pawn with b5 and try to open the b file and go for a queenside attack. And this second plan is what Leela chooses here, and she played a6. And now we have long castles, c6, and the b pawn is ready to roll and open the b file. So Terminator played here e5. He wants to push this knight from f6, and of course taking that pawn is not possible because this knight now is pinned to the queen and the knight on f6 still has to go. So taking on e5 doesn't make sense, it just only helps white to get a very strong d file. Instead of that, the knight went back to e8. Also going to h5 would lose the knight of the g4. So after knight e8 we have now f4. Terminator is strengthening this pawn on e5. Leela counterattacks with b5, and of course taking this pawn would be completely losing after a takes on b5. b4 is coming and then the a pawn is undefended and the queen will come out and the knight can go to b6, the bishop can go to f5. White's king would be killed very soon. So of course Terminator didn't open neither the b file, neither the a file, and played c5, trying to keep everything closed. Leela doesn't want to take neither on c5 and neither on e5, because then again after the pawn recaptures the d file opens up to White's advantage, there would be a lot of pressure down the d file. So instead of that she decides to put even more pressure on Terminator's center with f6. And we can see that both pawns, e5 and c5, are under a lot of pressure. And Leela would like to see, for example, c takes on d6, because then after pawn takes and knight takes, suddenly a lot of squares would be available for the black pieces, and here she would love to play f5 to allow this bishop to attack down the long diagonal. and also strengthen the e4 square. Or alternatively, if the pawn would take, let's say, on f6, then the knight could recapture, and again the dark-squared bishop would be open and black would stand better. So after f6, with the desire to keep lines open and also make this bishop bad, Terminator played here e6, attacking the knight with tempo and forcing it to b8. But after this, the e6 pawn is very hard to defend and this bishop will take it off. So Terminator continued with f5, which temporarily defends on e6, but black can now take on f5 and then e6 will also drop. And that would be already a 2 points advantage for black. We now have bishop d3, but bishop takes on e6, and white is 2 pawns down, which is a pretty big material deficit. But on the upside, white now has this diagonal to work with, and he can put pressure on the f-file and maybe make the light-squared bishop a very active piece. Maybe he can take on f5 and be only 1 pawn down. So Terminator continued with knight e2, and this knight is now heading to f4 to attack this bishop. So we have bishop c4 trying to exchange this light-squared bishop. And T has a chance now to take back one of his pawns with bishop takes on f5. But after e6, this bishop would have to drop back and black's pawns are pretty mobile. So instead of this, Terminator went for something much better and he decided to give up a third pawn with g4. Of course, he wants to open some lines. And now after bishop takes on d3 and queen takes, Leela takes also on g4 and she's 3 pawns up. A very big material advantage for black here. Does Terminator have enough here? Is he scared? Well, not really, because here he played h3, giving up a 4th pawn. Amazing. And now if the pawn takes on h3, then there's queen f5, preventing f5 and cutting away the queen's view of h7. And now white threatens to take on h3 and then take on h7. But Leela decided that 3 pawns is enough and he wants the h-file closed, so she played here g3. But it's too late. White already has an attack on black's king and Leela's attack is still nowhere. T continued now with knight takes on g3 and Leela played e6. Very good move. It not only takes away f5 from the knight and the queen, but it also prepares f5 by black, allowing this knight maybe to come to f6 and open some diagonals for the bishop and the queen. And it also allows this rook on a8 to come back and defend the king side. Terminator now continued with queen e4, he's attacking e6, so we have queen d7, and now rook g1. The h-file is not available, so the rook moves to the g-file. Leela now continued with d5, which takes away e4 and d5 from the white knights with tempo. And after queen h4 we have queen e7 to allow this other knight to come into the defense. Knight h5, Terminator is slowly piling up on this bishop. We have rook f7, and now after bishop h6, Terminator is already threatening to exchange everything on g7 and basically give up bishop, knight and 2 rooks for bishop, rook, queen and knight, and that would mean he would have queen and knight versus rook and knight and a couple of pawns with a completely winning position for white. So Leela played here king h8, getting out of the spin and not allowing rook g7 to work. But now, after knight f4, we have another deadly threat here with knight g6 check, winning this queen or getting mated. For example, after knight d7, knight g6 check, and black either loses the queen or gets mated after h takes on g6. White can continue with bishop g7 check, which is a double check the king has to take, and now rook g6 check. And if the king goes back, then he gets mated on h8. And if the king takes, then there's rook g1 check, and after king f5, the king gets mated on g4. So after knight f4, Leela played here queen back to d7, but now comes rook e1, attacking e6, and that pawn is very hard to defend. If black plays here e5, then this trick with knight g6 works again, because if the pawn takes, bishop takes, king takes, rook takes on g6. Now if the king takes the rook, then he gets mated again, but he can now run to f8, and after queen h8, it's not a mate, he can go to e7. But the point is now that after d takes on e5, white has all kind of threats. He's threatening to take this pawn or push it, and black has no good solutions. If the king tries to run, then there's e takes on f6, and white threatens to take this knight, and after the queen recaptures, play rook g8, and that wins the queen and then the game. So after rook e1, Leela didn't bother defending e6, and she played a5. Terminator now takes on e6, and after knight a6 he decides to give up the exchange on g7, but first it takes with the knight, and now after knight takes, he takes with the rook. Rook takes, and now of course not bishop takes on g7 and queen takes, because then black has an extra pawn and he's fine, but queen f6, maintaining this rook in a pin and trying to pile up on it. And queen f7 doesn't work, because then after bishop takes and queen takes, white could play queen takes on c6, and not only attacking the rook and the knight, but also b5 and d5. And d5 is of special importance, because now this knight could get to d5, and from there it could get easily to the black king. So after queen takes on f6, we have rook g8 defending their rook, and now rook e6, attacking c6 and forcing knight b8. And now since e4 and d5 are unavailable for the white knight, he tries a different route and he goes to e2. He tries to get to the black king, maybe from f4. But we have now queen f7. Leela goes for a new queen exchange. Terminator avoids that. And after rook f8, king d2 and b4, Terminator decides to take back the exchange by taking on g7. And now after queen takes, he dropped back the queen to e3, still avoiding the queen exchange of course, since Leela's king is much weaker. And now after king g8, seeing that it's very difficult to approach the black king with the knight without giving counter chances for black, Terminator devises a new plan, and that plan is to go with the king to a4 and win the a5 pawn. And he executes it in the following way: rook e7 attacking the queen, and now knight f4 with tempo, queen f6, and now after knight d3, f2 is again nicely guarded, no checks available, and now king c2, king b3 and king a4 could come, or if after king c2 Leela would be playing a4 to take away the b3 square, then b4 would be hanging and could be taken out by the knight. So the game now continued with queen g6, and after king c2 we have a4, and taking on b4 is not yet possible because this knight is in a pin. So Terminator now decides that it's time for a queen exchange and played queen e6 check. Queen takes, rook takes, king f7, and now rook h6 attacking this pawn. King g7 is possible, but after rook d6 the rook is still attacking c6, keeping the knight on b8, and this rook can't really leave the back rank because rook d8 attacking this knight is very strong. So instead of king g7 we have rook g8, and now the rook takes the pawn, king e6, rook b7, and now a3. Trying to give some checks to the white king doesn't work, because after rook takes, king e2, the checks will run out and both b8 and b4 are attacked. So instead of rook g2 and stuff, we have a3, but now Terminator takes on b4, and after king f5 he also takes on a3, and after king e4 Leela is threatening to give a check on g2 and win this knight on d3, so we have knight f2 check, king f3, knight g4, and now rook h8, attacking this pawn on h3, but the rook can't really take there because his own rook on b8 is attacked. Terminator continued with a4, and now we have king back to e4. Of course, taking on h3 doesn't work because of knight e5 check and then winning this knight on b8. So we have king e4, a5, knight a6, but now after rook b6, c6 drops, knight c7, rook takes on c6, knight b5, and Leela is threatening to take on d4. But at this point, it doesn't matter because the a pawn is just too strong and will promote soon. We have rook b6, knight takes with check, king d2, knight f5, and now king c3. The king is going back to help the pawns. Rook h3 check, king b4, rook h4. And in order to win some time with the a pawn, Terminator even gives up this knight. a6, rook takes, a7, king e5 check, king a5, and now rook g2, going for this trick with check from behind and winning the queen. If the pawn promotes now, then there's rook a2 check, king b4, rook a8, and black would be winning. So instead of that, Terminator played here a4, not allowing this rook to get behind the a pawn. Rook g8, but now rook b8, shielding the pawn, shielding the queening square. Rook g6, and we have a new queen on the board. And from here on, the game didn't last for long. We have now a rook check and the rook exchange. And after the king took back, we have now king b4, knight f3, c6, the c pawn is going in now, knight c6 check, queen takes on c6, king e5, and now we have a new knight on the board. Terminator is proving that he has Leela genes inside. King d4, a5, king e3, a6, and it looks like we'll have a new piece on the board. Will it be a queen? Well, no, it's another knight. Terminator is improving on Leela. I don't think I saw her promoting to 2 knights in one game. King e2, queen takes on d5, king e3, knight d6, king f4, queen g2, king e3, knight b6, king d3, and now after knight d5, the king is forced to d4 and mated nicely with queen e4. What a game! Terminator sacked 4 pawns in order to open lines and get to Leela's king, and he succeeded. A very, very nice game in my opinion. Please subscribe, like and share, and check out some of the other games. You might enjoy them. Thanks for watching and see you soon.